Hey folks, Eshin Lacoste here from All Wise Transformation with another segment of conversations about mental health, spiritual practice, and self-care. But today we're starting a new series of conversation in regards to mental health and self-care in having a conversation about what does it mean to be distress intolerant. And so today, Juno Lux will be joining me in
I'm
having.
back. You couldn't get rid of me that easy.
I didn't want to get rid of you. When I reached out to Juno to let him know I had like this idea about having these series of conversations in regards to distress intolerance. I was sort of nervous. Juno was like, "I'm too busy. I got," because Juno got some stuff going on, and I do want him to talk about some of the stuff. But please remember to subscribe and hit a thumbs up. Juno, what's going on in your world? What's happening?
Oh, so many things. But before we get started and jump into the workbook and all that stuff, I just want to say, like, the last time I was here, I mentioned a book and I didn't have it, like, right on hand. But this is the book. It's called Psychic Witch. So good.
Ooh, okay,
By Matt Aram, highly recommended. And then I also brought up the Kabbalion last time.
yeah.
And I also tried to like stumble my way through spelling it very poorly. Um, but I wanted to just give the people at home some knowledge that the Kabbalion is underneath the like heading of mysticism that would be considered Hermeticism, and that's where a lot of like uh spiritual concepts and ideas are based. And if you want to like dive down a rabbit hole, check out the Council of Nicaea. But if you want to know more about Hermeticism, the four books or like four works that deal with that are the Kabbalion, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, and the Life and Teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. Um,
Nice.
and that is at the root of a lot of mystical and magic societies. So, like, Hermeticism is the base of the Rosicrucian belief system, and also like traditions like the Golden Dawn. So, I just wanted to open with that because I hate leaving things unaddressed. And I was like, I just kind of opened a box of worms for people. I was like, check out Hermeticism, you'll see. I just wanted to come back with that.
I
Um,
I appreciate you circling back around. Wait.
yeah.
So for folks who don't know, like, who are you? Like, what? Like, for folks who didn't see that previous segment of us together, like, who are you, Juno? Like,
Well,
what
if
do
you
you
didn't see
do?
the previous segment of us together, what are you doing with your life? That's first. That's my first question. No, I'm just kidding. Um, I am Juno Lux Epifanio, and I am a modern day mystic. I founded an organization just about a year and a half, 2 years ago called the House of H, which asks queer people and our allies to look at our place in the world differently. And we kind of, our approach is a holistic approach to community and spirituality that allows people to age with grace, dignity, and elegance in all at all stages of life. So that's what I do. That's what I live for. As a
Love
famous
it.
Which one said.
I love it. I'll have all Juno's connections down below if you want more information or just to reach out. Because let me tell you, Juno's working it. And so that's why I'm a little appreciative for Juno joining me and having these conversations specifically on what we're going to be talking about these next couple of modules is understanding distress intolerance, accepting distress intolerance, improving distress intolerance, and these conversations are going to be fun. You know, they're going to be a little academic because I think Juno and I both love absorbing information and sort of processing it and I'm hoping to sort of share some of those and we're going to take our time with these and just really delving deeper into these conversations. But before we start into that, Gina, I got some questions for you.
I have all the answers, maybe I hope.
Well, let's find out. So just to sort of warm our conversation, I'm curious if animals could talk, which one do you think would be the rudest?
The rudest.
Yeah.
Um, I think that hippopotamuses would probably be like ornery old men. Like like they give me the energy of those two Muppets. You know what I mean? The two old men Muppets in the opera box. And I think like that is very much the energy that I get from a hippopotamus. So I think a hippopotamus would be rude, but like they might have reasons.
I love that.
Yeah.
Which animal do I think would be rude? I feel like what do you call those praying mantis? Is it like they look uh
Yeah, praying mantises.
praying mantises? I feel like they would be like rude son of a bitches. So just like get out of my way. I'm coming through. I got someplace to be.
They also have the energy of like an old queen a little bit. Like with those hands constantly
Yes.
like this. It's very like
Yeah, yeah, with a little purse and their like
yeah.
gloved hands.
Yeah. I love that for them.
Okay, what one more question. One more question. Let's see. What is the weirdest food combination you enjoy?
Oh, okay. So I make this one sandwich that I think is just like everything, and people always think it's the weirdest thing when I make it, but I swear to God, it's delicious. So, I do pumpernickel bread, toasted, and then on that I spread garlic confit, which is like when you take garlic and you lightly poach it in oil until it becomes soft and mash it up. So that. And then on top of that, I put peanut butter. I like a
Ooh,
chunky peanut butter.
okay.
And then I put kimchi, which is like the fermented Korean cabbage. It's like spicy and delicious. And then I top that with a chili sesame oil and sesame seeds that are toasted. And like when I tell you it is so next level, it's like eating like a spicy peanut sauce sandwich that's like has
Ooh.
all the umami that you want. But it sounds really weird, the combination, but it's delicious.
You had me up until kimchi.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I heard kimchi, it was like I love kimchi in general, but I wasn't sure with like that combination of things in there.
I promise. Try it and you'll be like, you changed my life. I will never look at this the same way again. I cannot participate. The limit does not exist.
I don't know if I would do it by myself. Like if we were hanging out and it so happened that that's what we were gonna be having for lunch, maybe, but I don't think I'm willing to do that on my own.
Okay, okay, that's fair. Well, when you do come over eventually, especially like for the Pride Party this year, because I have like a Pride Party every year, um, then you'll have to try it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I've been trying to think about this one. I feel like bananas, peanut butter, and avocado
Mm.
feels okay, but I don't think I would ever like let people know that's what in the sandwich that I'm eating.
I mean, I actually, it's funny you bringing this up because just this week I looked up like how is peanut butter and avocado together. So it's funny that you bring it up because that's been something I've been thinking about. Like, I think
So
that could possibly be
what does it
delicious.
say? Because like it tastes good to me. Because sometimes avocado has like this sort of creamy taste, and I sometimes substitute it for mayonnaise.
Yes.
It just I don't know. I just love sort of like that creamy, but I know it's going bad when it has. I can't tell that taste of that. It's like a copper almost when it's sort of like not quite bad, but like like if it's one more day. It's
It's no
gone.
good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, did you ever notice that avocados in general are ripe for about 13 seconds? Like they go from like the perfect avocado to like you're like, I'll just give it one more day. I'm not feeling it right now. And the next day the whole thing is inconsumable, not able to be eaten. It
You're like
just
I just turned around for a minute. Like what?
yeah.
What just
I'm just
happened?
cutting it open. What happens? Like it's wild. Ooh, but there is actually a really great way to save your avocados. Fun fact.
What is it?
So if you take an avocado and you leave the pit in it, it it ages or it oxidizes like much slower.
Okay.
And if you put that half of an avocado, say, in a Tupperware and cover over it to like where it's not floating, like if you cover it with water, the lack of oxygen will also help it stay fresh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I, I always feel like every time I cut the avocado, I'm like, I gotta eat this all.
Yes. Yeah.
Because
No, I know. And that's the urgency. It
because
says,
because I
I'm
don't
high
want to
test. I'm temperamental.
I don't want to deal with like, okay, where I'm gonna store it and like I already threw the pit out and should I keep the pit? And I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Like, a little life hack, folks.
Yeah.
How to save your avocados. And don't feel rushed because I hate that rush feeling with avocados.
Yeah. Ooh, but I'm sorry that I know this isn't like a cooking or food podcast, but if you take an avocado and you score it like diagonally so that it's like squares basically, and you crack an egg into it, like into where the seed once was,
Yeah, yeah.
and you put it in like your air fryer or your oven or whatever until the egg becomes solid. It's like such a creamy, delicious breakfast experience with like a little bit of hot
Ooh.
sauce or cheese on top of it. Next level. You actually don't even need the cheese because of the fattiness from the avocado.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know where I got this idea, but it's a taboo to warm up avocado.
No, that's a very real debate. That is a
Is
very real
okay,
debate.
because I feel like I should never say this out loud, but like, should I be warming up my avocado? Like,
I mean, I enjoy it, but like I also enjoy kimchi and peanut butter on a pumpernickel sandwich. So I might be the weird one. You know what I mean?
oh man.
It's
Well,
a very real possibility, and I have to admit that.
I know but I like the idea of putting like the egg where the avocado where the seed used to be and sort of like just like getting it all warmed up together and then like just scooping and eating it out of the skin itself. I love
Yeah. And
that.
it's great to garnish with like those little green onions that I always forget the name of. They're like scallions, I think. Yeah, you like
Yeah,
chop them
yeah.
in there. Yeah. Those are great on top of it. Little sesame seeds, little chili oil. You can sense a theme, I'm sure. Like I like a little bit of heat to all of my food, but
Spicy. You can't go
yeah.
wrong.
Cuban and Italian, I'm a spicy meatball.
Uh, okay, with that, we're gonna get into it, folks.
Yes,
We did have a point about getting together.
we promise.
So today the conversation is going to start off with module one, understanding distress intolerance, and we'll do a brief introduction, and then what is distress intolerance, and then the paradox of distress intolerance. So, Gina, where would you like to start?
Um, so when reading, do you want me to, are we gonna read it or we're just gonna give our thoughts on it? What's happening?
We're going to sort of just discuss it.
Okay. So I think like in the introduction portion of this, it really talks about the importance of like harnessing hormesis, like really taking the stress response and how not everyone is great at dealing with that. But I
Yeah.
think that if we did things like breath work and stuff like that, it helps to regulate emotions and builds resilience. And I think that this whole workbook kind of asks us to work through like emotional discomfort and really shows us how to embrace like manageable stressors so that we then can deal in the moment. We're not deal in the moment, but yeah, like as we exist in the present moment when stressors come up, we can better manage them. And I think this workbook talks about how to conquer that and like work within that framework and turn and how we can then turn our discomfort into strength through like training our nervous system for regulation.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing that stood out to me, going off what you said in the sense of that emotions are normal. I think
Hmm.
we have this sort of perception of that we're sort of like these feelingless, objective, moving through the world, sort of like very sort of stoic, and that nothing bothers us, and and it asks us to really say emotions are normal,
Yeah.
and not to let that throw you off or make you scared, because sometimes emotions are so overwhelming that they are scary. And I don't think a lot of people, at least the way that I sort of practice, in the sense of emotions are just there to tell me to pay attention to something. That's all.
Yeah.
It's neither good, it's neither bad, um, but it's just okay. Let's pay attention to this.
I always look at the emotions that I receive as like, what is this telling me about how I can and or should show up in the world? Because specifically if an emotion is making me uncomfortable, I'm very interested in like why it's making me uncomfortable, where in my body that sits that's making me uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and also like where that comes from in my social history, like where that comes from
Mhm.
in how I've become me. And like, is that something, or is that a narrative that I want to hold on to, or is that a narrative that I want to let go of?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, part of the other part within the introduction is that it's looking at emotions are a broad range of things, right? It's you could feel sad and feel happy at the same time, right? You could also feel sad and feel a little melancholy, right? And so they're like emotions sort of have this broad range to them, and that it's not always sort of pigeonholed. Sometimes it is, but being able to be in a space of like, okay, my jealousy is not just that. There's more to that feeling of jealousy, or my anxiety is not just the anxiety of the moment. There's a broad range of emotions within that.
I think that that's kind of also asking people to not be subject to their emotions, like to not let
Mm,
the emotion happen to you, but allow the emotion to move through you instead
yeah,
of like settling.
yeah,
And I think that that's a large part of the work that this like workbook talks about and talks through, really like
yeah.
how to, yeah, how to like let the thing move through you instead of staying stuck in it.
Right. Because I think one of the things that it said is like writing the thought, and sort of like or yeah, just writing the thought, or being present. And we'll definitely talk further about that, but there is something to be said of I don't necessarily need to react right now. I'm just going to sit with this feeling. I'm not going to put any particular emphasis on it. I'm not going to invest more into it. I'm just going to acknowledge it, and I'm going to sit with it. And again, I don't have to do anything right now. Maybe later on, but right now I don't have to do anything.
I think that also comes from, and I know you briefly mentioned being the observer before, almost as like that somehow makes you more like cold or closed off. But I think that being the observer also gives you the grace to look at an emotion with a little bit more nuance as well, so that it's not immediately affecting the ego. And you're kind of, because as soon as an emotion hits the ego, which is completely necessary, the ego, but like when it hits that, that's when frequently there's resistance. Like if it's a negative emotion, its interaction with the ego is the thing that causes resistance. So if you can
Mhm.
kind of not remove yourself from it, but say like, okay, as soon as you feel that spike or that change or that cortisol rush or whatever it happens to be, like that's when you can say like, one, what is this I'm experiencing? And then two, those nuances of like the world of duality in general, right?
Yeah,
Where like I can feel angry with you, but also still have a profound amount of love for you. And
yeah.
sometimes, like, those I'm not saying they're always in tandem, but like sometimes the people that you love most are the people that can make you the angriest, really, because
Yes.
I think that as much as family is a huge part of this human experience, it's also like the people that our soul chooses to present us with the most tests to cause growth. But that's like also looking at it through a little bit of a like woo-woo mystical lens. But I
Hmm.
I have to look at everything through that lens. It's just like how I live.
Hmm. 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 And and I feel that as we sort of get a little further into this topic, that sometimes the the resistance to the emotion, right? The resistance of pushing it down, the need to ignore it. Sometimes that in itself feeds more into the distress feeling, and being able to acknowledge that you don't have to put extra energy because I feel like everything is energy, so
Yes.
the sense of mental energy, the amount of time that I put into reading, or the sense of physical energy, if I'm jogging, right? So everything is energy. And so if your emotional tank is low, then that sort of leaves you open to engaging in unhealthy behaviors. And I say unhealthy behaviors, they're just unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? They're they're not necessarily serving you, but it's a way of coping. And so for me, it's never necessarily the specific vice, but it's it's how are we dealing with the emotion, and how are we acknowledging that I don't have to pressure the emotion to form into a particular box, or pressure that an emotion to be smaller, or push that away, because I think the energy of doing that uh, can be more stressful and feeds into the feeds into the emotion and makes it more intense.
Well, to me, that has to do with the fact that as a society, we are, uh, I'm trying to think of how to say this in a way that is not like inflammatory. But I think that like
Don't get me canceled. I'm just starting, Juno. I'm just starting.
but like no, such is the result of existing under a patriarchy, right? Like emotions are inherently tied to the divine feminine, and I think that
Mm,
we are
mm,
also, if
mm.
you look at like queer people, right? Or like people that are emotionally tuned in or like extra sensitive, it's like don't be like a girl.
Yeah,
And then there's the aspect of like women being like especially under our current administration and what they desire to go back to like it's really the hate and misunderstanding of women and the role of the divine feminine that is like promoting these types of unhealthy relationships to stress because we're not really taught growing up
yeah,
how to adequately manage our
yeah,
stress or communicate our needs. Frequently, children are told that like their needs aren't valid because it's inconvenient to their parent for whatever reason, and that's across all demographics, not specifically limited to one. I think
yeah,
just as much as we don't value the experiences of the youth or the shaping of those experiences because we're so tied up in keeping a system in place that is broken instead of looking to evolve.
yeah,
It's the same discrimination that people of old age face. It's like unless you are um like it seems like the fear of progress and the fear of accessing the divine feminine is what keeps things like this stuck and in a non-progressive pattern,
yeah,
like in an unhealthy like release of distress. I'm
yeah.
sorry that I soapboxed there for a
No,
moment,
no,
but
no,
like
no, no.
I think it's all interconnected. That's really what it comes down to for me.
No, no, and which sort of triggered for me in the sense of like, yes, right. The counter narrative is the demonization or the belittling of the feminine energy. But within the framework of the sort of the heteronormative, within the framework of the heteronormative, the
Heteronormative experience, the
yeah,
heteronormative narrative.
thank you, heteronormative narrative, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. That you have to be perfect, right? Within that narrative, you have to present yourself in a particular way. You have to have the white picket fence. You sort of have to have all of your ducks in a row at the right time when you say you're going to do it, and it's supposed to be perfect. And emotions are not, right? Like emotions asks us to be human, and human
Yeah.
is awkwardness, and being human is sort of not knowing and being scared and being happy and being joyous and not necessarily having to put a meaning on it so that it falls in a narrative that says, okay, this is how I want folks to see me, or this is how I want to be portrayed, or have this um, external experience. And so within that narrative, I feel like the need or the conversation about being perfect is so damaging. It's yeah.
And I think like that also in many ways feeds the issue that is also brought on by distress, which is procrastination.
Mm,
I think that as a society, both like not only queer, but like at large, there's this illusion that perfection is what is striven for. And not only that it's what we strive for, but it's like kind of the only acceptable answer. And the society that we're in right now isn't set up in such a way that allows everyone to strive for perfection in a way that is equal and accessible to all. And
mm,
I think that when we um, when we take our personal power back or take our personal empowerment back, that's when these changes can be made. And also, like making these types of changes about how we handle distress and like what homeostasis looks like in the body, that's when we can like begin to reclaim our personal power, or, and which is like our voice, which is how we stay powerful.
right, right. Because there's something I would feel like is fearful talking about emotions, right? Because it goes to your point earlier in the sense of only women do that, and women are weak, and women are scared little creatures, and they need protection, and they need, to be led in a particular way. Again, under that heteronormative narrative of perfectionism and masculinity, whatever that really means. Um, and it's just not be scared, right? Because it's scary to be in love. It's scary to be scared or
Well,
angry.
that's because that also requires vulnerability, which
Yeah,
we are not taught to behave like we are not taught to interact with in a healthy way. At this point in society, it's just not a value that we all understand as important when it's really at the crux of many things. Like ultimately, there are always two choices in life, always. And it's, are you choosing fear or are you choosing love? And
yeah,
so I think when we move out of the fear-based space, and I'm not saying that we can do that overnight, but I think when we move out of making fear-based choices and making love-based choices, that's when you really kind of like raise your internal frequency. Like as like if we're talking about everything being vibration and everything being frequency, choosing to exist from a place of love, even if like moving through a challenging emotion or like a challenging situation, choosing the love for yourself and choosing the love of your people and choosing the love of your tribe and choosing to make moves towards how you can be the voice of love.
yeah,
People think that love is a passive emotion, but no, like love is a verb, love is an action, love is a movement. So like by choosing to stay in love with the human experience, we choose to like move through these and allow these to process. Pressing things down is just fear.
yeah,
Embracing them is love, and
yeah,
embracing them is a forward movement.
yeah. A- and I think, and even, we were sort of talking this offline, and in the sense of like within that heteronormative framework is the capitalistic, like capitalism, in the sense of that you have to have purpose, you have to have meaning, you have to have value, and if you don't, then why even bother? Why even bother existing if you don't bring something to the table? And what you bring to the table may not look like anybody else's, but the expectation is that it's supposed to look a particular way, have a particular flavor, and have a particular beat to it within that sort of capitalist heteronormative framework.
I think that capitalism also, what's frequently not addressed when talking about capitalism is just that it's not a sustainable model.
Yeah.
It's not a sustainable model. And um, when you kind of choose to separate yourself from making that the default setting on your life, that's when again we have the option of reclaiming power because we're saying, no, we're not participating in life that way because we find it like morally abhorrent or reprehensible.
Yeah,
And so I think that the first thing, not to say like the first way to get through this workbook is to like defund capitalism or like dismantle from the system, but I think like you're always in general working towards a goal of embodying your highest incarnation and your highest self while we're on this planet.
yeah,
And I think that by asking yourself a series of questions like, how do I show up in this world? How do I want to show up in this world? How do I process this thing that I'm feeling? How do I move through this thing that I'm feeling?
mhm,
That's how we begin to really have conversations that are meaningful and can bring people together. And I
yeah,
think that this workbook, I mean, I know it is about like distress intolerance, but that's at the root of many of today's issues. The fact that none of us know how to appropriately handle stress or communicate our needs and feelings in a way that allows for civil discord.
yeah. Oh, well said. Well said. Ah.
Thanks.
So the definition of distress intolerance is a perceived inability to fully experience unpleasant, averse, or uncomfortable emotions, and it accepted by a desperate need to escape the uncomfortable emotion, right?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Um, I think that I think that in general, like when it comes to what is distress intolerance, it also asks us to ask the question of like surrender and emotional mastery. And
Mm,
like, how do we move beyond distress intolerance is the question that we ask ourselves once we ask, what is distress intolerance?
yeah.
And I think that that to me comes from the power of surrender, which I learned a lot about when I read the book Letting Go by David R. Hawkins. I don't know if
Mm,
you have read that book, but it's
no,
like a
no.
fantastic read. He's a PhD and he really talks about what kind of moving up the emotional scale looks like and how we don't have to sit in lower states like fear, shame, or guilt.
Mhm.
And how understanding kind of where the emotions are on the spectrum allows you to shift from one to the other. And in the what's that called? Like in the with the work of Abraham Hicks, they talk about like getting into the vortex and changing your mindset and all this stuff. But David R. Hawkins has a really great um, if you're a head tripper, I like to say, if you're someone that likes to think a lot and
Yeah,
you can process emotions in a way that's a little bit heady or like you want to kind of well, if you're here, you're like workbooking your way through your emotions as it is. So if you're a person that processes that way or can like uh work through things in that way, the book Letting Go by David R. Hawkins will be your your centerpiece in terms or not your centerpiece but like a huge part of learning how to operate the emotions and like what could developmentally come next if you want to stay out of your current if you want to like get out of the space of emotional distress, like what is the next stage that we can go to and how do we access that? That's where I use breath work a lot. I love breath work for that, like moving through things.
yeah, yeah. I think there is sort of this body mind connection, and maybe it is a thing, right? Like it is, and the only reason I'm saying it's a body mind connection is because it's a very Western way of thinking. Like we're all connected, but just being more intentional about that connection. That through breath, through movement. I know that when I was heavily practicing yoga, I would have like these moments I would be just crying, just like sobbing. I'm like, where is this coming from? Or I would sort of be meditating and sort of just focusing on my breath, and all of a sudden the wave of emotions would just come over me. I'm like, what is going on here? So there is this tapping into the body to release some of that tension or that hurt or that regret or whatever or that joy, because sometimes it's
Yeah.
crying out of joy too, because it's like you're realizing how much you just love the world and how much you just love people and want to be loved and you just want that just to sort of spread. And sometimes that even triggers me into a bout of tears when I'm just breathing.
Well, you know what it is? I think that that's also the practice of like mindfulness. And I think a lot of people are under the impression that meditation means silence in your head.
Yeah,
And really, when you meditate, what it's about is about seeing the emotion that you're experiencing or feeling the feeling that you're processing, but like allowing it to move through you without judging yourself for experiencing it.
yeah.
And I'm going to use a personal example of that,
Yes, yes,
if
please.
that's okay. So, when I was younger, I was like 11 years old when my dad passed away, and he passed away from uh Hodgkin's, or he had Hodgkin's disease, but then developed leukemia as a result of the extensive chemotherapy he was exposed to, and that's what caused him to pass away when I was like 11. And my childhood mind protected me from that pretty profoundly. I do not remember him looking sick. I do not remember anything like that, which is I'm thankful for in a way, because I'm sure that my adult mind would um, have a hard time with that, especially because in many ways, like as a child, my dad was my hero. Because like who's at least like in the with the with the dad I grew up with, it's very like that was very much my reality. And so I didn't realize this, but as a child, because I didn't remember him as being sick, there was a part of me that felt abandoned by his death. And so one day in meditation, it came up that I was feeling abandoned by my father. And how do you logic that away? Like, how do you logic away the fact that an 11-year-old lost his dad and then felt abandoned? Like, I remember when I started to process that, the very first thing I felt was um, judgment towards myself for feeling that. Like, how dare you feel abandoned because that was something that he didn't choose.
Yeah,
But then what I did was an exercise where I kind of visualized picking myself up, like picking my child self up and like telling myself it was going to be okay. And that was the way I was able to process that through meditation. And I think that the the not fully judging myself and letting that come and letting those thoughts work through me was like the thing that meditation gave me. So I think that meditation is about allowing the thoughts to process and move through you without judging yourself for experiencing them because they're valid.
yeah, yeah.
But it's about moving through them. It's not about
Right,
getting stuck in them.
right, right. And I appreciate you sharing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I appreciate in the sense of there's this slowing down, right? And then and being able to give space to the ability to be in the emotion or to sort of observe the emotion. And because we're such in this sort of fast pace, right? Like you're right. Meditation can look differently, like or mindfulness. And maybe that's a more appropriate term because you could be mindfully eating, you could be mindfully cooking, right? Like you could be mindfully walking, right? So it's providing the space to be able to sort of unplug from all of the noise out there, to be able to sort of hear what part of the subconscious or part of the internal world has to say or has to share with you.
And I think part of the science mind part of it, at least, or like the kind of more clinical aspect of it, is the fact that we spend a lot of our time in the prefrontal cortex of our brain, which is also the youngest developed part of our brain. It's like the most recent addition. It's the new kid on the block. Um, so I think when you do things like breath work, which I associate as like an active meditation, because sometimes in the world we are in, we are also taught that doing nothing or sitting still is not valid. And I think that if you're a person that needs to experience processing as an active movement, then something like breathwork is great at getting you out of the prefrontal cortex, and how that happens is through the stimulation of the vagus nerve, which then puts us into the parasympathetic nervous system, which then allows us to more safely process emotions because when we are in the parasympathetic nervous system, we can experience rest and digest instead of fight or flight, which is where a lot of us live today. Unfortunately, we live in fight or flight because there's this discussion around safety for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I feel like we've been sort of focusing on the negative sides of emotions, right? Like, because emotions can be positive too, right? Like,
Emotions are wonderful things. And I think like, yeah, you're right. We have been talking about the negative side of it, but I think that's it's because like it's putting in the like for me, I found that I was able to reach my highest highs emotionally through processing my lowest lows. Like when it came to yeah, I could easily I mean actually no, I couldn't easily. I wish that like this lifetime carried for me the simplicity of like living a surface life. And I think like Wicked is a great reflection of today's times and I
I
hate
haven't
to like
seen it. I haven't
oh
seen
my
it.
God, you need to. It will inspire you. Like I left the theater crying, saying like this is why the house like this is why my organization is needed right now because it's just so of the times. Like, but there's this line in it, dancing through life, skimming the surface, gliding where turf is smooth. Life's more painless for the brainless. Why think too hard when it's so soothing, dancing through life? And I think like you have the option of participating in this existence in a way that is very surface and very simple. And if that is fulfilling for you, like bless. But if you want to do the work to like heal your shadows and process your emotions and move through that stuff, you can experience life in a way that is so much more profound than we're told that we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's putting in the work and it's willing to move through the complicated thing. It's being willing to move through the complicated things.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because, I think there is joy and there is
I'm sorry if you
sadness.
didn't bargain for all this heaviness with me when you
No,
thought we were.
this is why I asked you to join me because I knew we would really like jump into this because I love talking about the human condition. I love talking about like what makes us think the way we do and feel the way that we feel and move and just like what does it mean to be human and specifically human in relations with other people because I do agree with you. I feel like there's a part of myself I really learn about I learn more of myself in relationship with other people, even though sometimes the relationship is good or bad, right? Like sometimes bad relationships, and I think you pointed this out, is where you're able to look back when you're in a good place or when you're processing it to say like, oh, this was my part in the situation. Oh, I was being gaslighted, or you know what?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna own this, and it's through relationships that we learn about ourselves, and I think people come from this sort of narcissistic view of um, I have a version of myself, and then I have the version of the person I want to be with and missing the whole point of the emotional complexity and the messiness is about the emotions of being human, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think a large part of that also is asking yourself, how do you want to move through and participate with the world?
Yeah.
It's like saying, do you want to participate with the world as someone who um, is an observer, or do you want to participate with the world in a way where you become an active participant? And I think that Um, and not to like bring it back to this, but I think in many ways, capitalism, the biggest lie that it tells us is that we're meant to move through this human experience alone, when really, like, historically through evolution, we've been tribal creatures who've relied on each other for the sake of survival and for the sake of community. I mean, we are not meant to live. in this physical corporeal experience alone.
Yeah.
We are not meant
Yeah.
to journey solo.
Yeah.
We are meant to like move through and guide each other. And I think that we've gotten away from that
Yeah.
because we've been distracted. And the more distracted we are by like these false narratives and this like American dream, I think that the sooner we move away from those unsustainable, unrealistic, very whitewashed like thoughts, the more we can get to a real tangible existence
Yeah.
where like we actually participate with each other as the like kind of organism that is divinely moving through this moment. Like
Yeah.
the fact that there is nothing that separates you from me or this screen or this microphone or whatever, or my tea. We are all actively participating with this existence in one divine dance.
Yeah. Yeah. Which goes back to the how scary that is, right? How and how beautiful it is at the same time, too.
And
And
that is paradox. That is that is the divine gift of living in a world of duality.
Juno, to your comfort level, what negative emotions do you find it difficult to deal with?
Um, I think that I the emotion that I find most difficult to deal with is anger.
Mm,
And I think because it is an emotion that we are taught, at least in today's society, um, it has this double-edged sword, right? Because like men aren't supposed to feel feelings,
mm,
but if you're feeling, and the only way it's truly okay for a man to express is through anger. And you can express anger at each other, but not the system that has placed this upon you. And I think that when you kind of allow, for me, when I get angry, instantly it's a question of like, well, what does this mean for me and how can I process it? Because a lot of the anger that I experience is systemic in nature
yeah,
and feeling as a queer, like mixed race person that there's not really support. And so that's why I'm actively working towards building support. But the, I just think that the way that they tell us to experience anger and then also tell us where we're allowed to process and put it is
yeah,
just unfair. And so
yeah,
that's why the emotion that I have the hardest trouble with is anger, but it also, as a result, because I've done the work of knowing how to process my emotions, I transmute it into inspiration, where
yeah,
I
yeah,
actively work on surrendering and embodying the observer and then like moving through the process and
yeah,
practicing surrender, like acknowledging, observing, breathing, and
yeah.
then like looking for the places of growth in it and like trusting the nature of the fact that I truly believe as humans, we are always um, doing our absolute best with what we were equipped with till this very moment in existence, which I also think allows me to give compassion to people I might not otherwise agree with. So I'm not being angry for me, at least, and staying there is a choice. But if I can then show compassion for the anger, show compassion for the person I'm experiencing anger at, and show compassion to myself for feeling that anger, it allows me to better process it and understand how I can use it productively instead of sitting in the role of the victim.
Mm, mm,
Because I don't look at myself like a victim.
yeah,
So I think that that the the narrative around that also needs to be addressed.
yeah,
Like what because it's like everyone has that, right? Everyone has the victim, everyone has the child,
yeah,
everyone has the saboteur, everyone has like the prostitute, like everyone has these like core archetypes that exist within them. And I think when we step out of the narrative of like this feeling is defining me. You can say like this, the aspect of this feeling that I'm dealing with right now is this part of my psyche. And if I can address that and heal that and understand why I'm feeling it, we can get to the root cause of the emotion and better process it. Because also by understanding the part of you that it comes from, it not that it depersonalizes the experience, but it doesn't allow the experience to define you.
Yeah. 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 And for me, it's this one that mic drop that you just did with like not, it's okay to be angry, but not angry at the system. That ah well well said, right? Like be angry at everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Be angry at, at this trans person, be angry at this disability person, be angry at this fat person, right? Like be angry at everybody else, but don't be angry at the system that has put you against each other, right?
Yeah. Because we are so much stronger as one voice and we are so much stronger in numbers. And like, I mean, I think that the most rebellious thing that anyone can do when feeling disempowered is speak with one voice
Mhm.
and come together.
Yeah,
And so I think that, I mean, I acknowledge that we've moved a little bit outside of the parameters of what this workbook is talking about, but I think that it's addressing a much larger problem. And I think that when you work through things like this and work through workbooks like this about distress and stress and how we process, we have to really evaluate what our role in this system is and what our role in the society is and what's being asked of us. And not only what's being asked of us, but how can we participate with it in a way that's meaningful and rewards us and not just feeds this pain body that we've been given by our parents or our grandparents or beliefs that are not actually our beliefs, but just things we've been taught. You know what I mean? Like, how can we dismantle a system that is inherently broke and also move through that in a way that is empowered and not disenfranchised?
right, right, right.
Like, those are the questions that this workbook will take you to if you take it to like the deepest
Right,
parts of who you are as a person and don't
right,
just like exist up here on the surface,
right.
gliding where turf is smooth.
Well, yeah, I think, part of the workbook, right, is in the sense of like how are we speaking to our emotions? How are we talking about our emotions? And it's something that you said earlier about being vulnerable, right? Because emotions require us vulnerability, and it's through vulnerability that we make connections, and it's through those connections that we sort of have trust. And so I think sometimes we move through the world without trusting other people, like, and for good reason, because I'm not saying that there are good people out there, because there are manipulative son of a holes out
Yeah.
there.
How
And
diplomatic of you, Eshin.
and
You're
so
it's like trying to be nice and I'm the bad cop, like dismantle the system, take it down from the top. Like we need to pull the trees up from the roots. Like uh,
and this is why I have you on.
I'm sorry.
You have no reason to be sorry. Um uh
But it is, I'm just sorry. Like, I just want to say, like, the whole thing about distress and like dealing with distress, and I think like this section in general about like replying to what distress intolerance is ultimately the answer or the like the solution in this component of the workbook is reframing and
right,
like reframing emotional discomfort, understanding that emotional discomfort is temporary, and if we can use a tool for self-growth rather than something to escape, like choosing to do breathwork or meditation over having that glass of wine or that edible or something that's going to unplug you from the reality of your situation.
yeah,
Instead, choosing to go into the emotion, like into the happiness, even with
yeah,
the positive emotions, because
yeah,
you said we were dealing with a lot of negative emotions. Like, where does this positive emotion come from? Is this a healthy positive emotion that I'm experiencing?
yeah,
Is like, where is that rooted and how can I either embrace it and bring more of it into my existence or how can I like it's always constantly a scale of turning things up and turning things down on the dial. Because
right.
if we are all just frequency, it's like tuning into a radio station.
And I love that you pointed that out, right, about the perception, right? It's how are we perceiving this, right? And being able, and I love that narrative of the dial, because part of perception is I'm aware that I am tuning into this, or I am aware that I'm moving from middle to extreme. And so part of that work is how do I acknowledge that my perception of the situation can be skewed and that I'm experiencing this because I have had trauma. I'm experiencing this because I've had joys. I've experiencing this because I've lived in the south end of the US compared to the northern uh, end of the US. And so sometimes the experience has a lot to do with your upbringing and sort of geographical and cultural. And so there are multiple layers to it. And I don't want anybody, any of our listeners to make it sound like this is easy work, because it's not.
It's not. It's not at all. But it's a choice, right? It's
Yes, yeah,
like if
yeah,
you're saying I don't just want to float through, I don't just want to participate in easy mode version of the game,
right.
which I think like as a queer person, easy mode isn't an option for us. And that's what it comes down to. We don't have easy mode as an
No,
option. We come
no,
into this world, into this incarnation of existence,
yeah,
like processing the advanced mode. We start
yeah,
on hard mode. And then like it
right,
just manifests differently. Like
yeah,
as someone who is, say, I know queer people who like are rather conservative. But when I look at them, I also say like, well, you are also cis, white, male, queer people that are not like you're not fully experiencing the nuanced version of the experience, right? And as we were talking about earlier, like you can be two things at once. You can be um happy and sad. You can be like loving and hateful. Like you can and for the same person.
right,
So I think that in many ways, the people that choose to not move through this work are kind of living in a less nuanced
right,
existence.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
No, no, and I love that because I love that sort of segment in the sense of that nuance, right? Because some people they do want to live in anger. Like anger fuels them. Anger gives them something, right? Like there are some people who, for lack of a better word, who like the drama or like observing the drama that's caused. And so, there are individuals who all they know is that emotional intensity, and to take that away, it feels empty to say to say that you don't always have to be fighting with your partner, or it just because you're not talking does not mean that there isn't anything going on, or there's anything that you need not to check in with your partner about, or family member about, or a coworker about, right? Like, so it's trying to remember that you don't necessarily need to exist off that emotion. Like, that emotion doesn't necessarily define you. You're not always, you are not the angry person, right? Or
Yeah.
you are not always the sad person, right? Like, there is a nuance. Yeah, just because you're experiencing it, and just because it may feel overwhelming, and just because it may feel like there's no end to it, it doesn't mean like that's who you are. Because there's a broad range, right? As a queer, gay men of color, like just those alone have multiple emotional nuances to them. And I don't identify with just one, even though, I may appear and sound as just one. But there that idea that I don't have to be that negative, or all of that, right?
And I think that's also part of um I don't want to say dismantling the ego, but I think that is a part of participating with the ego in a way that is productive instead of like destructive. So like the ego, as much as it is at the beginning, the ego is the thing that teaches us to live in fear. But if you can process the fear that the ego produces and you can move through that that toxic trait or however you want to phrase it, if you can move through the ego's fear-based thinking, your ego can become your biggest advocate. It can be the thing that you draw strength from. It can be the thing that empowers you. And so I think that is what is at the root of what this work does. It brings you to a place where you have a healthier relationship with your ego because you know who you are at your core. And I
Yeah.
think once we sit in our personal power and we sit in
Mhm.
our voice, that's when, again, change can happen and like people can evolve and move forward and societies develop
Yeah.
through through processing these emotions and doing the work with the ego and stuff like that.
So we've talked about introduction to distress intolerance. We've talked about what it is, and now sort of just wrapping things up, the paradox.
Hmm.
Do you want to say some stuff about the paradox of emotions?
Well, as I was working through this workbook, of course, I bring it all back to like mysticism and tarot and all that stuff. And I think that, like, it's kind of, if we're comparing it to the Fool's Journey, which is like what tarot is, the Fool is in many ways like the unknown and like moving into that sometimes with fear, sometimes with joy and acceptance and being excited, but like through the lens of working through emotional distress and like this new journey that you might be going on with this workbook, um, then like it is the aspect of the fool that is like the fear of the unknown. And then the like emotional distress, if you will, is like the puddle or the lesson or the thing that you're moving through. Because like in your workbook, you show a distress puddle and you create the analogy of like it's just something that you move through. It's not you don't want to get stuck in this like puddle like it's a lake.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
moving through that and kind of embracing the energy of the magician gives you the option of like mastery through acceptance and surrender and really what that looks like. And I think that the work we do with that has a lot to do with like recognizing illusion and trusting the process and
Mhm.
like stepping forward into the experience which allows us to move through the discomfort which then allows us to transmute the emotions from say like anger or frustration or fear into like wisdom and how we can show up and use our voice and how um we can process these things and alchemize them and transmute them.
Yeah. I do agree, like in the sense of like emotions, you don't have to do anything with them. The paradox is like if you feed more into it, it's just going to intensify, or if you try to resist it, it's going to intensify. And so it is a matter of getting to a place where, yeah, I'm feeling and I could just observe. I'm just going to observe the feeling that I'm having now. Um, because the more we resist, the more it sort of persists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the more resistance we feel, the worse it's gonna get because you're also resisting is suppressing, and suppressing just gets is like suppressing an emotion just stores it in the body.
Yeah.
So if you've ever heard the expression like the body has memory or the body holds memory,
Mhm.
like that's what it's talking about. And like that's why I mean I've said this on the first podcast I did with you, and I know that I've brought up breath work throughout this. But I think that generally, for me, I love breathwork so much because it is like the soap and water for my energetic body. It is the thing that allows me to move through these emotions by kind of unsticking the things that are stuck in my physical person that I maybe didn't know that I was experiencing,
Mhm.
or like allows me to, again, get out of the prefrontal cortex to just allow the things and the thoughts to process.
So as we sort of wind down, any points that sort of stood out to you? Because for me, it's the idea of not fearing the emotions and really embracing the emotions. The idea of that our emotions are normal and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're lesser than or what have you, and that you are allowed to feel the way that you're feeling. It's completely valid.
Yeah.
Just acknowledge it. Just sort of um, see it for what it is, and that yeah, in one minute you can be sad, and then other minute you can be happy, and either one is good or bad.
I think that for me, the takeaway from this section of what we're working with was like the whole aspect of what is distress intolerance to me. Because I think that in this work and doing doing this kind of processing kind of invites you into a conversation with yourself that we're not taught to have. And I think that by even asking yourself the question of like, what does this mean to me? What does distress intolerance look like to me? How does stress affect me? Like, when you engage in those types of questions, I think that know thyself is like how we show up our best in this experience. So the more we know ourselves and the more we are able to process with uh, authenticity and integrity and honesty with ourselves, because like there's no bigger betrayal than lying to yourself. Like, so I think that how we move through distress and understanding what distress is for us is key.
Yeah.
And that's what this section of the workbook did for me.
Yeah. So we're going to end here, but be mindful that we're still in module one, and we're going to continue to work through module one and our other three modules. And so please continue this conversation with me and Juno as we talk about spiritual practice, mental health, self-care within the framework of distress intolerance. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and I just want to also offer to anyone that's listening right now, or in the future for that matter, every month I do a monthly breathwork session to help us move through things like this. And I do it each month in accordance with the full moon, just so that there's like a consistent thing to look forward to. And generally, full moons are used for processing the letting go of emotions. And so um, that's what I invite you to do. And that can be found at my website or on my Instagram, but it's super easy to schedule. I'm sure Ashen will put it in the show notes below, or
Yeah, yeah.
if you come to my Instagram or my website, which is thehouseofh.org, you can make that reservation. And it's so fun and it's free. And it's even if you're not here for the woo woo, which I am heavy in, as you gathered by
We
this point.
love the
At
woo-woo.
least you can gather a tool that will help you regulate your nervous system in a way that is like meaningful, profound, and it's something that you can use every day in the moment as you're experiencing these things.
And for folks who may not know, I think Juno is also creating like a little curriculum workbook to go with to go with these discussions of distress and tolerance. And I think it's pretty witchy, woo-woo kind of work.
Yeah, so I don't know how you want me to offer that to people, but I was planning on at once we're done working through workbook one that I would make it available to people. But it's things like mantras for each of these sections and uh, journal reflections for each of these sections and just things that might move your thoughts around this and move your thoughts around what was discussed in each of these sections. So it's an invitation to do the work. If you choose to like want to engage and dive in the deep end, it's going to be an invitation for you.
Yes, please. Yes,
Yeah.
please take the invitation. And we will see you next time at All Wise Transformations. Yeah.